Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this beautiful blustery day out there. We're nice and safe and warm here at the Civic Center, the Civic Room. I'm here to call to order the Black Creek Oyster Bay Services Committee for this Monday, April 8th, 2024. And I don't see too many people in the gallery are unfamiliar with the basics, where the washrooms are, the muster stations and all that. So we'll move right into the recognition of our traditional territories. As you know, we are doing our business today on the traditional unceded territory, the Comox First Nations. So we're starting off with the resolution status report for receipt, if we can receive that. I'll second that. Any discussion on receipt, Director? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed to receipt? That's carried. Report, Fire Service Operational Guideline Update. A report from April 4th regarding approval of the annual updates to the Comox Valley Regional District Fire Service Operational Guidelines Manual for receipt. Moving second on receipt. And over to CAO for introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the directors. I see Bruce Green is online. Hi, Bruce. Bruce is our Senior Manager of Regional Fire Services. And Bruce, you'll be taking us through the staff report. I may have gotten your title wrong there, Bruce, but good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone. And thanks, James, and through the CAO to the chair and the directors. What I've got before you today is the annual update, as the chair said, for our operational guidelines. A little bit of history. Back in 2020, we hired a consultant to create an operational guideline package, which was completed, and part of that is to provide annual updates and changes. And also, as you're aware, we did a fire service review last year, and some of the findings in there had recommendations to create some operational guidelines around records management and to ensure we're all doing the proper records management. So before you today, we have a records management OG for for calls, records management for training operational guideline. And the other one is a big one is a skills maintenance OG, which makes us compliant with the BC minimum firefighter training standard. We have to get our skills and then we have to annually maintain them. And the OG there has a maintenance schedule that we have created for the firefighters to do. And then the last one is, as you're aware, a couple of years ago, we created in our bylaws a high-risk activities where we can put a high-risk activities ban on. There is sometimes where some businesses may need an exemption to continue their work and for that. So we have created a way they can get an exemption OG, which lays out the procedure they're going to have to do, and that would include the fire chief going to the site and putting some fairly severe restrictions on what they can do. So with that, I ask if you have any questions.
Thank you, Fire Chief Green. Any questions from Director? Director Rice is okay. My only question is, do things actually get more streamlined and simpler every year? Is that the way it works?
I wish that was the way it worked.
Well done. A lot of good work goes into this, and I think you'll reap your just reward. So there's no discussion on that. I'd like to call the question on receipt. Did we move receipt? Okay, so Director Rice?
Like to move the recommendation.
We're just on receipt first, so. Okay, so on receipt, any in favor? That carries, and once again?
Like to move the recommendation that the operational guideline updates for Oyster River Fire Rescue as provided in the staff report dated April 4th, 2024 be approved.
And I'll second that. No further discussion? So any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Thank you, Bruce. Moving right along, we got the water restrictions options, a report here from April 4th. That's been quite a long time coming, I think. regarding options for optimizing implementation of water restrictions in response to a board request to consider whether water restrictions should be linked to provincial drought levels for receipt. Moved and seconded on receipt. And over to CAO for introductions of staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Zoe Norcross New, our Watershed Protection Coordinator, will be introducing the staff report, and Chris LaRose, Senior Manager of Water Wastewater Services, will be able to support as the conversation unfolds. So Zoe, over to you.
Thanks, James. Through the chair. Yes, as mentioned in the introduction, this report is in response to a request from the board that staff investigate whether or not it would make sense to tie the Comox Valley's water restrictions to the provincial drought levels. As you're all aware, last year the drought levels were, and they continue to become more of an issue every year. And there's been a little bit of public confusion as to how the numbers that they see on the provincial drought levels relate to water restrictions. And so that's the basis on which we did this investigation. I also like to once again acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And yes, sorry to repeat again, the recent drought conditions raised the question as to whether or not we're doing enough with our current water restrictions. And so in order to investigate that further, we looked at what the other jurisdictions on the island are doing, including the RDN, Cowichan Valley, and the CRD, and are looking at some options that we could consider moving forward. To begin with, the Cowichan Valley has a kind of different situation than many of the other regional districts in that their water supply is very constrained. So they only have a few inches of operating range on the Cowichan Lake. And so this issue for them has been going on for a long time, for many years, where in the summertime, the lake levels drop so low that they use pumps to move the water over from the lake into the river. And that photo that you see there is showing just that. When the lake levels are low, water has to be pumped into the river. So this is something that they've been dealing with for a long time, and their water restrictions in general are a lot tighter than ours. So what residents are allowed to do during summertime water use is a lot more constrained than anybody else on the island due to these severe water shortages that they've been dealing with, and they've just received a grant to raise their weir. So they decided that they would tie their local water restrictions in the Cowichan Valley to the provincial drought levels. So as the drought levels increase, their water restrictions increase as well. Then we took a look at the RDN. So RDN also, like the Cowichan Valley, has a lot of individual water systems. They have around 20. And like Cowichan, I forgot to mention as well, Cowichan and RDN both have universal metering. So they're completely metered through all their water systems. The water sources in the RDN are very abundant, as opposed, which is in contrast to the Cowichan Valley. So RDN did consider whether or not to tie their restrictions to the drought levels, but they opted not to because they feel that there's no direct correlation between water availability in their region and drought levels. They have a lot of different water systems, but the systems move to the different stages independently based on the availability of water in each of those systems. However, they have coordinated the stage definitions and the messaging around water restrictions across the entire region and all of their water systems. So the image on the right is taken, it's a screenshot from their website. And so any residents in the RDN, no matter what system they're on, can go to this website, click on what the restrictions are for their area. And the water restriction stage definitions, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, are consistent across all of the water systems, which is something that is mentioning that in contrast to what our situation is up here in the Comox Valley. Our water systems, the different water systems, all have different definitions of stage, especially the upper stages 2, 3, and 4. So they also have consistent messaging, and what they do is that representatives from each of the water system meet regularly every 2 to 3 weeks during the summertime, and they coordinate and they try to support each other in terms of when they're moving and how they're moving through their stages. They also, with their universal metering, they've been able to implement really steeply tiered water rates. And interestingly, they do it based on their daily consumption. And so people are paying up to $4 per cubic meter, which is a very high price if they use a lot of water in one day. So what that does is it really encourages people to spread out their water use, not use so much at one time, which really helps to address peak usage. Capital Regional District also has very abundant water supplies. Also, numerous water systems and universal metering. So CRD has not considered tying their water restrictions to drought levels because they just felt that it wasn't needed. So their water supply is so abundant that last year during our major drought that we had, they did not even need to move their water system to stage 3 because there was plenty of water in their reservoir and the availability was good. Comox Valley. So last year in July, when the province moved to drought level 5, which is the highest drought level, that was in early July. And at that time, the Comox Lake Reservoir was completely full. So if we had our water restrictions tied to the provincial drought levels, we would have been moving up to a really high level of water restrictions at the beginning of July when the reservoir was full. And so that would likely have presented some pushback from the public looking at the lake and seeing that it's completely full and that it seems to be quite abundant. And there definitely are times when later in the fall when we have had real water shortages. And so with the Comox Valley water system, our water restrictions are tied directly to the levels of flow in the Puntledge River, but for all of their systems, including BCOB, the water restriction levels are just, we go to the next stage when there is a need based on the water supply. Well, the regional district has universal metering. The city of Courtenay and the town of Comox have not implemented universal metering for their residential water supplies yet. So looking at some ideas to consider moving forward for water restrictions, the one that we were asked to consider was whether or not it would make sense to tie water restriction stages to provincial drought levels. And this is, I think, partly in response to some of the public confusion around the numbers that they're seeing for drought levels versus numbers they're seeing for water restrictions. And this has also been an issue in the other regional districts when we talked to them as well. And they said that their response has, especially RDN and CRD, has just been to provide more public education around the difference between those drought levels and water restriction levels. Because both those regions, RDN and CRD, as well as the situation in the Comox Valley, is that oftentimes when drought levels are high, we still have a real abundance of water in our water sources. And that the provincial drought levels do not appear to be directly correlated with water source availability. Other options are to not change our current water restrictions and do monthly check-ins with the directors as to the water levels and whether we need to consider moving to different stages. We could further restrict the water use in terms of what's allowed during the different stages of water restrictions. The only thing to consider with this one, though, is that sometimes when you constrict the time in which people are allowed to water, that forces the peaks to go up. And when the peaks go up, that increases the demand on the water supply, and this can eventually lead to the need for increasing the size of our water infrastructure, which can be quite expensive. We could work towards universal metering in the Comox Valley with assistance from the CVRD, in terms of providing loan support funding. But the reason that this option is appealing is what has been used in the other regional districts is They use, for instance, what RDN's doing with the daily water use consumption. So their tiers are based on the daily consumption, which allows them to really take a chunk out of the peak water use levels, which is, I think, one of the biggest issues with water restrictions is that when you confine people to certain restricted times, it really puts a strain on the water system. But yes, those innovative measures for incentivizing water conservation can really only be achieved with universal metering. And then and any of these options could be used independently or together. But the last one that we see that has worked really well in RDN is coordinated definitions and communications and messaging around water restrictions. So to have the staged definitions be consistent across all the water systems in the CVRD and have one portal where people can go to get the information that they need and keep the messaging and communications consistent through the region. So with that, I will make way for any questions that you may have. And yeah, the idea is just to bring this information forward to the board.
Well, thank you very much. Interesting that the actual water on a lot of these bigger lakes that are controlled by BC Hydro, not by the provincial government or the local government. Is that correct?
CRD actually is
They've got their own.
Yes,
They got their own debt. They own their water source. I know they
that's
do.
correct.
Much like Vancouver. Director Rice, you got some information from north of the Oyster?
Thank you, Chair. The things are a little bit more complicated in my area because we have two water systems. So one is managed by Hydro, and they're the ones that basically tell us when we're going to move to the next restriction. But that also creates a lot of confusion for the folks that are on the south end of town because, again, they're on a different water system. So I think that I really like the idea of education and coordinated messaging because I think that that will help dispel some of the confusion that we have. We have folks in Area D that don't really know what water system they're on. So I think that that messaging really needs to be clear and loud in terms of, you know, everything that is south of the Driftwood restaurant, you're on Comox water system. Everything north of that is Campbell River. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I think moving to universal water meters is important. I was able to get a grant last year for 2.8 million for Area D. So that's going to do our northern customers. I think that that is key to really drilling home the fact that water conservation is something that we can manage. And I think that that water meter really helps that. I know that it's been a tough sell because people have been allowed to use water, basically whatever you need, whatever you want. And we need to rethink that. And so I think that water meters help that quite a bit. So I would be quite a fan of that. The other thing that I do want to point out is that it would be nice to get some coordinated messaging between both Campbell River and the Comox Valley because of our mixed customer base. That's all I had. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Director Rice. So basically, we're just receiving this report and the recommendation is to bring it to the board tomorrow. It's coming to the water committee as well, isn't it? Tomorrow? Yeah, so it's coming to the water committee, not the board. Is it coming to the board as well?
Chris, maybe if you want to touch on the sequencing as well as at today's Electrolyte Services Committee meeting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, James. Through the chair, that's correct. So the intention was to take it through all three committees. So this committee, the EASC, and then the water committee, and we're hoping that each of them support the kind of the direction to elevate the conversation to the board. Just for to really advance that final bullet on Zoe's slide there, just in terms of the coordination of consistent messaging and communications across all of the service areas. I don't think it was intended to be tomorrow's board, but rather the subsequent one. Yeah.
And with regards to day-by-day monitoring, is that going to be a hardship for the department? Are we pretty well with all our new modern technology able to keep lid on that pretty easily?
Yeah, so it's a direction that we're moving in. So I guess two things. One, we're really pushing for as great a level of consistency across the region as possible. So having meters within the municipalities would allow us to achieve that. That being said, one meter is not exactly equal to another meter. So to do a daily type of metering and to follow kind of RDN's lead on some of those innovative measures would require a type of meter where you can read every day. Some of our older systems still have a tap. We started with tap meters where you actually have to walk around and tap each meter for the data. Then we shifted to drive-by. And now we're in the process of replacing meters in this service area and Royston with our new census meters that have instantaneous read capability. And that's where we plan to go for all of our service areas. So, within the next 5 years, we hope to have converted our systems over to the type of meter that would allow us to do that type of daily metering, which, as Zoe mentioned, it has just a range of benefits, including the ability to really reduce our peak hour demands and the demands on our infrastructure, but also significantly improve our per capita consumption.
And just Chris, if you could also follow up on Director Rice's comments about the congratulations on the grant funding for the metering for Area D. But do you want to comment on the metering that currently exists in the BCOB system for those properties north of the Oyster that are in our system?
Yeah, so we are in year 4 of a 5-year meter replacement program that the SRD that the director has contributed community works funding towards. So once that's complete, so it's progressing north and south of the Oyster roughly at the same pace. So there has been a little bit of delay in that replacement program, but we're now projecting that every meter north and south of the Oyster will be replaced by 2026. So and we did just meet last week with our counterparts at the SRD just to brainstorm, so give some information about our own meter program, talk about the upcoming meter installation project at the Northern Area D water system, and just generally start those kind of regular series of meetings between staff to make sure that we're sharing information and helping each other. So that happened. That first of those meetings happened last week, and we plan to continue to meet every 2 months with SRD staff to talk about that and other topics. Yeah.
So am I correct in thinking then that out of all the jurisdictions you mentioned as comparatives, we're the only one that isn't on universal metering?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, well, yeah, the history of it, of course, was that we were setting aside money for universal metering back, 12 years ago, I guess. And the city voted to have that money returned so they could build some approaches to bridges and stuff with it. So yeah, interesting. Where this whole communication piece is going to fall down, of course, and I know it's unrelated, but in the agricultural areas, that's where drought is really biting. And as you probably know, the Water Sustainability Act has been handed over to the new Walrus Ministry. And there's a lot of farms out there that are experiencing armed young men with bulletproof vests coming onto their property unannounced and shutting down their water systems. So there's a drive, of course, to have everything licensed, and the issue revolves around some of the small farmers that are really going to be impacted. especially the ones that make less than, which is about 37% of the farms in Comox Valley, make less than $10,000 in taxable receipts. So they're being expected to spend that and more on a hydrology report. And then some of them have to spend another that or more on lining their ponds so they can demonstrate that there's no infiltration of groundwater into their ponds. So it baffles everybody in the country to see people overwatering lawns and water running down the streets when they can't even afford to grow hay to feed their cattle. And as a consequence, of course, the hay comes in from Alberta on a semi-truck across on a ferry. How sustainable is that? So that's a whole other issue, and I know we don't want to touch it because it's kind of a third rail when it comes to what we're talking with potable water. But just to let you know, if you're going to try to do a communication piece, it's going to be lacking because that is not being addressed. That is not being recognized. Okay, so we're on receipt. Any further discussion? No, Dr. Rice, Dr. Rice, Director Rice. Okay, so on receipt, anyone opposed? That carries, and there's a recommendation to bring the staff report forward. I can never get you fast enough. Moved by Director Rice, seconded by Director Grieve, and on the vote, anyone opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of our agenda today. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming and good presentation. Thanks very much, folks. And we are adjourned. We're terminated.